This is my video about what the best creature is in every card game. The best creature, best monster, best minion, whatever you want to call it in your card game, every card game has them. But the way your card game is made will make a big difference in terms of what actually ends up being the best or strongest monster in your card game. Maybe your card game is looking for a creature that's really strong in combat, a minion that's absolutely gigantic and has massive game impact when played down. Maybe the most important thing in your card game is a card that just kills your opponent as soon as possible, something that can attack right away and do an absolute ton of damage to your opponent, killing them in one fell swoop. Maybe your card game really values flexibility, having a card that can fit into almost any shell and provides a good value no matter what point in the game you are playing. Maybe your strongest cards define the way that the game you have is played entirely, a card that would be completely null and void in any other game because there's simply nothing that you can equate to the card that you have. But if we're going to talk about the strongest card in a card game, you have to come from a competitive base. In this video, I'm going to be looking at a card's overall power in terms of tournament play. Which cards had the most game impact when played down in tournament, not necessarily the one that wins the most, but the one that you will remember the most and be playing with the most from a competitive angle. Because of this, you're also going to have to take time into account a lot. A card like Sangan, for example, has been printed as early as the very first set of Yu-Gi-Oh!, meaning that it'll have a lot more time to see play and become a competitive staple than a card like Appaloosa, which comes out much, much later. It's also important to state that each of the cards will have to highlight the game it's from. A card like Zoroark GX would be completely ridiculous if transplanted into any other card game, so the fact that it is from Pokemon puts it in context with all the other cards present in Pokemon. I will also notably be skipping over a lot of cards which are generally design mistakes, end up getting errata or banned right away. While original Lurrus of the Dream Den is probably the strongest card in Magic, because it immediately got errated and nerfed and banned from almost every format, it's not really worth talking about as you simply cannot play with the card anymore. And of course, with any video like this, it is all opinion-based from me, so if you think that another card is the strongest creature in any given game, that is completely legitimate. First off, Magic the Gathering. So, what is the best creature present in Magic the Gathering? My pick is Dark Confidant. Dark Confidant, or as many as people know him, Bob, named after Bob Maher, who won the 2004 Invitational, is a card created by a competitive player, Bob Maher himself. The Invitational was a series ran by Wizards of the Coast where players would come and compete in a large event, and the winner of that event would not only get their likeness on a card, but would also get to take part in the design process of a card. Being a competitive player, Bob obviously wanted his card to be very, very strong, and he has absolutely accomplished this, and in my opinion, making the best creature present in Magic the Gathering of all time. Dark Confidant obviously saw a ton of standard play upon its initial printing in Ravnica, however, it sees tons of play even in Legacy or older formats because of its power level. Dark Confidant gives you a 2/1 body for 2 mana, which both provides a body for you to use to actually attack your opponent and apply pressure, but also provides a massive threat as its Upkeep trigger that gives you a free card from the top of your deck to your hand, gives you a huge benefit every single turn it is allowed to stay in play. Dark Confidant paired beautifully in Modern with a card like Liliana the Veil, which not only makes each player discard cards, meaning that you can take advantage of your extra cards in hand immediately, but also because of the fact that it can make players sacrifice creatures, it can quickly turn the game into a game that is purely focused on attrition, making Bob super duper powerful. Notably, the downside of Bob of the fact that you have to pay life to put the card from the top of your deck into your hand is both not optional, but also highly rewards very low curve decks. Lands have 0 mana cost, so they have no cost to you in your deck, but in general, in decks like Legacy decks, you will have a very, very low mana curve by default, meaning that Bob has a very, very low cost to be put in your deck. Dark Confidant's flexibility really shows well in these older, more legacy formats, as the fact that Bob is a 2/1 for 2 means that not only does it apply pressure to your opponent over the course of the game, forcing them to at least have one creature to block him so they can stop from dying, but also because it has a super duper powerful static ability, it means that over the course of the game, you will slowly grow an advantage even if you play down Bob later on in the game. Bob is such an iconic card, it has even been reprinted in the most recent of the Final Fantasy sets as a card that you are now once again allowed to play in Standard all these years later. Whilst Bob is absolutely a powerhouse and has seen an absolute ton of play over the years of Magic the Gathering, it is a card that has definitely succumbed to the power creep of the modern game. Whilst Dark Confidant being a 2-mana 2/1 back when it was first released was enough to apply a consistent amount of pressure to your opponent over the course of the game, nowadays 2 mana gets you a lot more than a 2/1 body and is easily contested by almost any 1 mana card. This continued alongside the fact that many powerful 1 toughness creatures have been printed, have upped the amount of cards which are made to specifically deal with 1 toughness creatures, Dark Confidant being one of those, makes it a lot weaker. A final point for Dark Confidant is that it also is made much weaker, as the fact of the matter is that many games last many less turns now in Magic than they used to, meaning that you will have much less time to draw cards from Dark Confidant over the course of a game. All that being said, for the 20 odd years of Dark Confidant being in print and a card that you can play in Magic the Gathering, it is one of the absolute best choices for creatures, and in my opinion, the best creature ever made in Magic the Gathering. In terms of honorable mentions, it would be remiss if I did not mention Snapcaster Mage, Tiango Chan's invitational card. He was the last winner of the invitational, so he made the latest card, Snapcaster Mage. Snapcaster, very similar to Dark Confidant, being a 2-mana 2/1. However, Snapcaster lets you cast any instant or sorcery from your graveyard for its cost and gives it flashback, meaning that it exiles itself after it is cast. A super powerful and flexible card, not only good early on to give you a recast of one of your cheaper spells, giving you extra value in the late game by casting one very, very expensive spell, and also being a functional 2/1 for 2, giving you an ability to block, attack, and do whatever you would need. In terms of power, I would probably give it over to Snapcaster Mage as being a stronger card than Dark Confidant. However, it was printed many years later and had a lot less time to see play, so I think Bob overall wins it out. Speaking of old cards though, Birds of Paradise, a card printed in the earliest set of Magic, is a definite contender for one of the strongest cards ever printed into the game. A 1-mana both ramp and mana fixer is super duper powerful no matter what format you're playing in. Even though it doesn't look that interesting or powerful, Birds of Paradise giving you immediate access to turn 3 on the second turn of the game, especially when you're on the play, can feel absolutely backbreaking no matter what format you're playing in. This, combined with the fact that it gets any type of mana, meaning that you can play it in many multicolored decks, gives you a ton of flexibility when playing with Birds of Paradise. And even though it may seem minor, the flying attached to Birds of Paradise means that even in the late game, when you've already utilized all the mana that you'll need for the course of the game, you can still suit up Birds of Paradise with ++1 counters or equipment and make it into a meaningful threat. In terms of meaningful threats though, there are probably no stronger card in Magic the Gathering than Tarmogoyf. In terms of raw damage, Tarmogoyf is an absolutely massive stat stick for only 2 mana, getting +1/+1 for each card type in every single graveyard. Tarmogoyf, even on turn 2, is usually at least a 2/3, as it's very easy to play an early land that sacrifices itself, and also very easy to play an early spell or creature which will either trade off or immediately get some resource from your opponents. Over the course of almost every game, Tarmogoyf grows to be even larger than a 2/3, being a 3/4 or a 4/5 for only 2 mana, which kills your opponent extremely quickly. Tarmogoyf is definitely a card that is unrivaled in terms of stats for the cost. Finally, if you wanted to look at a card from a most recent era, Ragavan Nimblepiffer is probably one of the most pushed cards the card game has ever seen. 1 mana for a 2/1 body is still up to rate even nowadays, but its attack trigger, which basically wins the game upon connecting with your opponent, is absolutely massive. Not only does Ragavan give you access to 1 free card every time it connects with your opponent from the top of their deck that you can play, but it also gives you a treasure token, meaning that not only does Ragavan ramp you as much as Birds of Paradise when you connect with it, it also provides you with an entire 2/1 body, an entire free card from your opponent. It even has the dash keyword if you can't get in on the first turn of the game. Ragavan, in my mind, really shows what Bob could be if he were printed nowadays, as Ragavan basically gives you a lot of the advantages that Bob gives you, recurring cards over the course of the game and a 2/1 body, but it does it faster, coming down on an earlier turn, and also provides you the mana to actually cast the cards that you gain access to. Overall, I'd say that even though Ragavan is a stronger card now, Bob, over the course of its entire lifetime, has been a stronger card, as it's just seen so much more play over the many years it's been legal. On to Yu-Gi-Oh! So in Yu-Gi-Oh!, what is the best monster card that you were able to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! In my opinion, it has to go to Black Luster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning. Black Luster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning, released originally with the other Chaos monsters, Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End, are some of the absolute most powerful Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards ever created. Whilst Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End immediately got sent to the ban list as the card is simply way too powerful and almost immediately wins the game upon triggering its effect, Black Luster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning ended up sitting on and off the ban list over the course of the years, being playable at multiple copies or a single copy depending on what time you were playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Simply because its power level was a bit less so than Chaos Emperor Dragon. Whilst Yu-Gi-Oh! Over the many years has definitely made a lot of cards which are stronger than BLS, it is very notable to state that BLS was released in 1996. In these days, the best thing you can do in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was usually to normal summon a monster and then set a few cards. The amount of power that you could generate by simply playing this one card in your deck was absolutely astronomical back in those days. The fact that BLS only requires you to have one light and one dark monster in your graveyard to be summoned for completely free, it means that not only can it slot into almost any deck, it means that also over the course of the many years, whenever there were any light and dark decks that were playable, BLS was an easy card to slot in to just give your deck more power. Early on in Yu-Gi-Oh's life, there weren't that many good monsters, but one of the best ones was Sangan, which just happens to be a dark monster, and when printed Cyber Dragon came out, one of the best light monsters you were able to play, Blackluster Soldier really took off as a card that you could play in almost any deck because of the strength of these generic enablers. Overall, I would describe BLS being released in 1996 a little bit like bringing a nuclear bomb into a kindergarten. There's simply not anything that any of the kindergartners can do that is even remotely close to the power level of the nuclear bomb. BLS is a card that was simply so powerful up until the year almost 2020. It was a card that would regularly still see play in decks and be a powerhouse staple that you could slot into any decks with lights and darks in it. Only when the recent, more modern age of Yu-Gi-Oh has come about has BLS finally fallen out of favor after all of those years. Whilst I think BLS definitely takes the spot as it is a card that is simply so old and seen absolutely so much play over the course of the years, there are lots of honorable mentions in Yu-Gi-Oh that I think are worth putting here. The most obvious one, in my opinion, is Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. This card's an almost auto-include in every single deck since its printing, being played at 3 copies almost all the time. The card is simply way too good and does almost anything any deck could want. Ash Blossom was already released into a game that was mostly focused on performing combos and getting cards from deck to the hand and special summoning cards from the deck, so having the ability to negate those two things is making Ash Blossom basically super playable, and as the game has gone on, that has only become more and more prevalent, meaning that Ash Blossom will only see more and more play. Though I don't really know how you can see more play as a card than Ash Blossom, as it is almost an auto-include in every deck as a 3 of no matter what. And whilst Ash Blossom does set the stage for what a powerful hand trap is, I think the original powerful hand trap definitely has to be Effect Veiler. Veiler is one of those cards that is super duper flexible and is a card that you absolutely have to admire for how much power is put into such a small card. Even though it's a 0/0, it's a level 1, it's a tuner, it's a spellcaster, it's a light, and it has a powerful effect that is effective against almost every deck in the metagame. Effect Veiler, despite being much older than Ash Blossom, even sees consistent play up to today, just because of how many options and different things you can slot Effect Veiler into to have be a powerful enabler. The fact that it's a tuner, the fact that it's a spellcaster, all of these things are relevant to different types of decks, and because it is a hand trap, it can slot into almost any deck as a meaningful way to disrupt your opponent. Thanks to all the Master Duel I've been playing, it would be remiss for me not to mention the card Maxi, a card that basically wins the game in the modern age when you activate it, simply because special summoning is the only thing that you can do in Yu-Gi-Oh! And because this card makes you draw 1 card every time your opponent does it, you will almost instantly win the game whenever it becomes your turn after your opponent specials like 5 times. I would have placed Maxi as the highest card on the list, however, Maxi, when it was originally printed, actually didn't see that much play, as special summoning simply wasn't that big of an element. There were some decks that could utilize it, so Maxi saw a lot of sideboard play, but in terms of a main deck card, Maxi wasn't a card that you would see almost at all. Finally, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has plenty of monsters like this, but my pick for Magical Scientists here goes to show that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always had monsters that were absolutely broken, even from its earliest years. Magical Scientist has basically sat on the ban list since its initial printing because of its combination with Catapult Turtle, almost immediately killing your opponent once you can set up those 2 cards on your board, because making fusion monsters from your fusion decks for only 1,000 life points is a huge swing. Combine this with the fact that in the modern age, just summoning any monster to your field for a very low cost of 1,000 life points is very good, Magical Scientist still sits on the ban list even to nowadays because of the fact that special summoning monsters for absolutely free will always be broken. Now for Hearthstone. In Hearthstone, what is the best minion? This one, I don't think it's particularly close. I think the best minion in Hearthstone is easily Bran Bronzebeard. Despite being pretty simple, Bran is deceptively strong. He's a 3-mana 2/4, and he simply says that your battle tries trigger twice. The most obvious strong point of Bran is that he costs a very low amount, which means he's really easy to combo with almost any other battlecry in the game. In the early days of Hearthstone, when Bran was first released, the best thing you could probably do is combine him with Cold Light Oracle, meaning that you can make your opponent draw 4 cards as well as you draw 4 cards, making it really easy to mill your opponent out by simply playing multiple Cold Light Oracles in one turn. And while comboing is one of the best things you can do with Bran, it's important to note that he also provides a ton of value and tempo when played down, not to mention that on his own, he is already a huge threat. Basically, anything you can conceive a battlecry of doing, Bran gives you an additional copy for only 3 mana, not to mention the fact that if you want to do Disruption, he was one of the best things to pair with Dirty Rat, pulling multiple cards from your opponent's hand in one go. Generating huge amounts of value off of cards which draw additional cards or generate additional cards, Bran can give you a ton of value, not to mention the fact that he can give you tons of tempo with cards which affect the board upon Battlecry, and the fact that Bran can do all of this stuff means that if you play down Bran on turn 3 and he is not dealt with, it is a huge problem for your opponent. It's this ease of abuse that I think really shows why Bran is by far the strongest card ever printed as a minion in Hearthstone. If we look at the retrain of Bran in Deep Miner Bran, not only does he cost twice as much mana, but he also has the stipulation that you have to start the game with no duplicates to your deck. You will always have the Bran effect up, but because he costs so much more and requires so much more from you as a deck builder, it makes Deep Miner Bran way harder, and this is also the nerf version as well. Bran is simply so strong, there is no way I could place any minion at the top of the list the same way I could with Bran. Whilst Bran has been good ever since its print and is definitely the most powerful minion in Hearthstone, there's a lot of honorable mentions I'd like to put here which are also super duper powerful minions. Though most of these minions aren't as strong for their body or their effect, they are more strong for the thing they do to the game, the prime example being Gen and Baku. Both of these cards have the text box that say at the start of the game, upgrade your hero power by either making it cost 1 or turning into the upgraded version of the hero power. These cards have a large cost of having your deck require only odd or even cost cards. However, because they give you an instant impact immediately at the start of the game, they almost guarantee that you're going to see play even into Wild, into many formats because of that power level. Having not only a thing that you can always guarantee that you get at the beginning of the game to power up yourself in comparison to your opponent is not only strong, these cards were so powerful that they forced an early rotation because they make the format extremely similar. Every single game you know for guaranteed that you're going to be able to use that hero power or 1 or get that upgraded version of your hero power, meaning that a lot of your games you're just going to be clicking the same button over and over again. And whilst these two start of game effects are definitely super strong in giving you something guaranteed, there's something even more guaranteed that you could put in your deck, and that is this legendary Patches the Pirate. Originally printed with Charge, Patches the Pirate only asks that you put any other pirate in your deck, and then he will summon himself out for free as a 1/1 from your deck. This makes Patches a free roll in almost any deck. If you were ever thinking of putting almost any pirate in your deck, you might as well put Patches in because he's going to give you a 3/1/1 worth of stats on the turn that you play your pirate. The only downside that ever comes with Patches is if you actually draw him, and then you have the downside of having a 1-mana 1/1 in your hand. That being said, with almost any amount of pirates over 1 put into your deck, which you are likely to do if you want to play one because you can play 2 copies of most cards in your deck, Patches is an almost auto-include and is a free roll in any deck that wants any board presence whatsoever. Finally, rounding out our powerful starter game effects, we have Prince Renathal. Prince Renathal, at the pretty low cost of having a starting deck of 40 cards, gives you a starting health total of 40 cards, 10 above what is the standard. This cost of having a 40 extra card deck is actually an upside in some scenarios, as having more cards in your deck makes it less likely that you run out of cards in your deck and end up in a fatigue scenario. Combine this with the fact that starting with an extra 40 life not only makes it harder for aggro decks to out-aggro you, but also makes it harder for combo decks to kill you in one turn with their combo, makes Renathal a highly valued card to put into your deck if you are playing any slower version of a deck. Prince Renathal was even powerful enough to sneak into many mid-range decks, as the difference of having an extra 9 cards plus Prince Renathal in your deck is really very little, and the upside of having such an advantageous matchup against aggro buying you so much more time is absolutely massive. To round it out here, I think it's pretty obvious that the starter game effects in Hearthstone are almost always really good. Giving you a powerful bonus at the beginning of the game is something that you can almost never turn down from deck building. As all these cards are neutral, they almost always would end up in some sort of deck where they will see play because of their inherent power level. And finally, for the Pokemon TCG. So what is the best Pokemon present in the Pokemon TCG? I would think that you can't get a stronger Pokemon than this. It has to be Shaymin EX. Shaymin EX, unlike a lot of the previous entries, is entirely focused on its setup ability, which says when you play it from your hand onto your bench, you can draw cards from your deck until you have 6 cards in your hand. Thanks to Shaymin being a basic Pokemon and being a colorless Pokemon, it means that literally any deck can slot it in, and it has super easy power for setup on any deck. Thanks to the fact that you can run up to 4 copies of Shaymin EX in your deck, when Shaymin was legal in the standard format of Pokemon TCG, almost all decks would run many copies of it just because it makes it really easy to set up whatever you want on the early turns of the game. The normal downside to running Pokemon like Shaymin EX is that the fact that if you only have Shaymin EX as your starting card in your 7-card hand, and you are forced to play down Shaymin EX in your active spot, it does functionally nothing and has a retreat cost that you would have to pay to get it out of there, not to mention that you don't get the benefit from the setup ability at all. However, thanks to the prevalence of double colorless energy, a card that has been present in Pokemon since almost the beginning, it's really easy for you to simply use Shaman EX's only attack, Sky Return, to not only pick up your double colorless energy for another use, but also pick up the Shaman, not only removing it from harm's way in your active spot, but also giving you the chance to use setup again next turn. Shaman EX is an absolute no-brainer for setup Pokemon. It is the ultimate setup Pokemon in my opinion, just because it can slot into any type of deck. If you're an aggressive deck and you want to go churn through your deck really, really fast, it pairs beautifully with cards like Scoop Up Net, which lets you pick up your Shaman EX and use it multiple times. If you're a slower deck and would rather take it at a more leisurely pace, Shaman EX still helps you set up your late game engines and lets you utilize cards that require a lot more cards to be put into play, because drawing up to 6 cards is a huge amount even for a Pokemon. Comparing Shaman to Radiant Greninja, which is one of the more played cards in the current standard metagame, really shows the power of a card like Shaman EX. Using concealed cards forces you to discard an energy card in order to draw 2 cards once per turn. In order to get up to the 6 cards that you would need to get as many cards as Shaman EX, you would not only need to use concealed cards 3 times over the course of 3 different turns, but you would also need to discard 3 different energy cards, ending up with you being down an additional 3 cards unless you have some great way to use them from your discard pile. Thanks to the fact that the investment behind Shaman EX is only a one-time setup, can be reused multiple times, and has powerful attacks that allow you to pick it up to reuse it for even more value, the low investment on Shaman EX really shows that it is the most powerful Pokemon ever printed into the TCG. However, Shaman doesn't stand alone. In the honorable mention section, there's a lot of strong Pokemon that could also end up on the list if you weren't just looking for a Pokemon purely based on setup. In terms of setup, however, I would be remiss not to mention the basic Uxie, which setups a Pokepower allows you to draw until you have 7 cards in your hand, 1 more than Shaman previously. This setup ability is even stronger than Shaman's ability, which would make you wonder why it isn't the one that I picked to be the strongest card in the game. And simply that is because Uxie only has 70 HP, making it more easy to knock out, and its basic attack of Psychic Restore simply puts it on the bottom of your deck, not letting you get another reset on Uxie as you would with Shaman. Was printed into probably one of the most powerful states that Pokemon was ever released into, whereas Shaman EX came after that time when things were a lot more powered down, so having a powerful setup effect was much more meaningful. I would also be remiss not to mention some attackers on here, as the previous 2 Pokemon I mentioned are only setup Pokemon, so I would also like to highlight Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia GX. This card's attack of Altered Creation is one of the most powerful attacks in the entire game, and basically makes it impossible for your opponent to race you on prize cards after you used it. Assuming you can fulfill the slow requirement of having 1 metal and 1 water energy attached to Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia, which is pretty easy to do, you will simply take an extra prize card every time you knock out a Pokemon for the rest of the game. This makes it unbelievably easy to win the game, as once you have activated it, you only need to knock out a minimum of 3 Pokemon to win the game, or 2 if you can knock out other GX Pokemon. One of the strongest attacks in the game, not only against other GX decks, because it is really easy to knock out a single GX Pokemon and then 1 basic Pokemon, but also completely snuffs any idea of Pokemon decks that are focused on single prizers, as it is really, really easy to run over them quickly with your ADP deck. Another attacker that is definitely worth mentioning is Zoroark GX. Zoroark GX is really the dream in terms of attackers that you would want in the Pokemon TCG, as it provides all the setup that you need in one Pokemon and also gives you a massive payoff once you actually get the Zoroark down. Once again, fueled by double colorless energy, Riotous Beating does an absolute ton of damage when you both have a full board, something that is really easy to do once you have Zoroark GX in play thanks to its trade Pokepower. The fact that trade lets you discard 1 card from your hand to draw 2 not only makes it easier to go search your deck for other cards, but because you can play multiple Zoroarks on your deck, you can start doing multiple trades per turn, setting up multiple Zoroark EX for attackers, basically never ever running out of juice or gas in your deck to beat your opponent with. Finally, even though Pokemon doesn't have a more eternal format where you can play any cards from the olden days, and because Pokemon has a rotating format, the older cards are going to get mentioned a lot less in this video, but I will still bring up this one, which is this Sneasel. Though it may not look like much now, Sneasel's early attacks in Fury Swipes and Beat Up do an absolutely massive amount of damage compared to other basic Pokemon present when Sneasel was released all the way back at the early years of the game. Despite the fact that both the attacks rely on coin flips, a regular attack for 2 energy at this stage dealt approximately 30 damage, meaning that if you could use Beat Up and you had 6 Pokemon in play, on average dealing even 60 damage would normally knock out most Pokemon on its own by itself. Sneasel not only highlights how far the Pokemon game has come from these early stage basic Pokemon, which were just basically focused on knocking each other out as fast as possible, but it also shows that power level really depends on where legacy formats are and the ways we're allowed to play the game itself. In conclusion here, looking at all of these really shows off what the different priorities are when you're playing each of the individual card games. If we look at Dark Confidant here, we can see that it focuses a lot on flexibility combined with a high power level. The ability to be playable early, late, the ability to deal damage as an attacker, but also provide value to you. A lot of flexibility is built into this one card, and a lot of power is built in at the same time, so you don't feel like you're losing anything when you play it down. Black Luster Soldier does a great job of highlighting the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all about that combo finish, all about making big boards and extending them with even more powerful cards, a way to attack to your opponent and do an absolute ton of damage, or help clear off your opponent's already built board so that way you can get in for a lethal attack. Bran Bronzebeard from Hearthstone really walks a middle ground, in my opinion, in between these two archetypes. It is both very flexible as a combo payoff, meaning that you can play it in combo decks as a way to easily kill your opponent when combined with other battle cries in your deck, but it also flexes into a card that is both powerful and able to be threatening even when played down alone. And finally, Shaman EX really shows off the Pokemon TCG's ability for massive draw power, more so than is present in any other card game. Whilst drawing a lot of cards may be something that you can do in other card games, in almost every game of the Pokemon TCG you are playing, you're going to be playing many cards, which lets you draw an absolute ton, so that way you can set up large Pokemon for huge attacks. Overall, I believe that looking at the highest power level cards and some of the strongest cards in your card games not only gives you an idea of what the card game players will value in terms of what is a good card and what needs to be played, but will also give you an insight into how the way the game is played. Even without playing a single match, you can understand what is valuable in a card game just by seeing these cards. Thanks for watching my video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more like this, and let me know down in the comments what your best pick for a monster card is in the comments down below. Let me know for Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, or any other card games that you play, what you think the strongest monster printed of all time is. Do keep in mind I didn't include any banned cards here, so a card that actually saw a lot of play would be much highly sought by me in comparison to a card that almost immediately got banned due to being too overpowered. Also, I'm going to be streaming right after the upload of this video, so if you're interested in seeing me do my challenge where I try to get to the top rank in every card game, feel free to stop on by. If that's not your thing, you can feel free to like and subscribe to see more content from me and stop by on the next video. Thanks for watching.